The night was alive with sirens, their blue and red pulses cutting across the quiet suburban street like jagged blades. Curtains twitched in nearby houses, neighbors peering through gaps as though the truth might seep into their living rooms, if they stared long enough. A woman in a robe stood on her porch, clutching her phone tightly, recording shaky footage as though evidence might protect her from the chaos unfolding. The camera light caught the modest two-story home at the center of it all. White siding, shutters in need of paint, a lawn that looked carefully trimmed by someone who cared about appearances. Yet the facade had cracked tonight. Officers moved swiftly, cordoning off the perimeter, their radios crackling from behind. The police line, reporters arrived with uncanny speed, microphones raised, questions flying. Who's inside? Is it true a detective's involved? Is there a teacher, Rachel Cole, connected to this? The names bled into the night air before any official statement could stop them. Detective Mark Harrison, Rachel Cole. Their reputations, once untouchable in this small town, became instant currency for gossip. A teacher beloved by students, a cop sworn to serve, now reduced to whispers, affair, betrayal, scandal. Rachel was seen once, just once, through the upstairs window, pale, disheveled, framed by light as if caught in a stage spotlight. Her hand brushed the curtain shut quickly, a fleeting image that the neighbors would later describe with the reverence of eyewitnesses to a tragedy. The media storm fed on itself, cameras flashing like lightning, as if the truth could be burned into the night sky. Then came the reveal that no one expected. A still frame from a security camera, grainy and green-tinted, broadcast by the evening news. It showed Mark Harrison, hours earlier, stepping into Rachel Cole's house and never coming back out. Daylight softened the edges of the scandal, but it didn't erase the whispers. The morning after the sirens, the street looked deceptively normal. Children waited at bus stops, sprinklers ticked across lawns, and newspapers lay folded on driveways. Yet, behind those suburban routines, every household carried fragments of the night before. Rachel Cole's world had once been wrapped in calm predictability. She arrived at Westbrook High every morning 15 minutes early, coffee in hand, her hair neatly tied back. Students loved her for the way she spoke about books, as though the characters were alive, walking beside them. Colleagues admired her devotion, her patience. To her seniors, she was the teacher who stayed late to proof essays, who reminded them that words could carry weight heavier than fists. But her private world was thinner than the public knew. She lived alone in the modest house now sealed by police tape. Her nights quiet except for the creak of floors and the hum of a desk lamp as she graded. To her friends, Rachel joked about solitude, but sometimes in conversation she slipped. You ever feel like your life is waiting for someone else to arrive? Mark Harrison's life seemed the opposite. He was the man who shook hands too, firmly, who showed up at church with his wife Lisa and their 2 children, who hosted backyard barbecues where he carved steaks like a patriarch. Neighbors admired his discipline, his devotion to the badge. He was a detective who carried the authority of the law like a second skin. But in both lives, hers of silence, his of structure, there were cracks invisible to the naked eye. Rachel's best friend, interviewed later, recalled one night when Rachel lowered her voice and said, "If people knew what I was hiding, they'd never look at me the same again." It began almost without intention, the kind of encounter that could have been harmless if either of them had chosen to walk away. Detective Mark Harrison first met Rachel Cole in the echoing hallways of Westbrook High. He was there on routine, duty, following up on a string of vandalism cases, locker doors scratched with crude graffiti, classroom windows smashed after hours. His presence carried weight, the badge glinting under fluorescent lights, his voice calm but authoritative as he questioned students. Rachel guided him through the corridors, her heels tapping faintly against the tiles. "This isn't the kind of school where kids do things like this," she said, half defensive, half pleading, as though she bore personal responsibility for the walls being scarred. Mark had smiled politely, noting her words in his pad. "Every school's got cracks," he replied. "Doesn't mean it's falling apart." The conversation should have ended there, but after the official questions there was a lingering pause. A glance held longer than necessary. Rachel laughed softly at something trivial, a joke about teenagers being more cunning than criminals, and Mark noticed the way her voice lightened. When she relaxed, what followed were exchanges dressed as professionalism, emails about the investigation, then text messages. Harmless at first, a late-night check-in about whether she felt safe locking up the classrooms. Soon the tone shifted. Questions became confessions. Compliments slipped between lines. A hotel room an hour out of town became their neutral ground. Curtains drawn, phones silenced. They built a parallel world where responsibilities dissolved. Rachel clung to it because it filled the silence of her evenings. Mark clung to it because it numbed the fractures in his marriage. One night, sliding into his car after a rushed meeting, Rachel noticed something small wedged between the seats. A plastic dinosaur toy, worn and sticky from a child's hands. She froze, her reflection staring back from the windshield. Mark caught her gaze. "Don't read into it," he said quickly, starting the engine. But the toy told a truth she could never ignore. Whatever future she imagined was already claimed by someone else. The secrecy grew into a ritual, almost a language of its own. Rachel slipped folded notes into books she knew Mark would borrow from the school library. Poems highlighted, margins marked with coded words only he could decipher. Mark responded with late-night messages from a burner phone, short and urgent. "Tomorrow. Same place." They became architects of deception. Mark told his colleagues he had stakeouts and extended interviews. Rachel claimed after-school tutoring sessions that no one attended. The lies weren't perfect, but they were constant enough to blur into routine, yet cracks widened. At home, Lisa Harrison noticed. Her husband returned later and later, smelling faintly of perfume she didn't wear. He claimed exhaustion, brushed off questions with the authority of a man used to controlling narratives. Still, Lisa saw the distance in his eyes at dinner, the way his fork lingered mid-air when his phone buzzed. At church, whispers trailed her. Friends who once envied her marriage now watched her with cautious pity. Lisa's smile stiffened as, she carried casseroles to potlucks alone, excuses forming faster than her faith could hold them. Meanwhile, Rachel lived in duality. By day, she was the devoted teacher, reading Shakespeare with her students as though love and betrayal were abstract lessons. By night, she rehearsed them in flesh and shadow. Her father called weekly, a retired officer whose gravelly voice still held the weight of command. She lied to him too, dodging his questions with half-truths. Then, the proof Lisa feared arrived. Folding laundry one evening, she found a crumpled receipt in Mark's jacket pocket. The name burned into her. Rachel Cole. A cheap motel room rented under her name, dated just days earlier. Lisa sat in silence, the washers spinning behind her like a heartbeat, her hands trembling over the paper. The kitchen light in the Harrisons' household buzzed faintly, casting long shadows across the dinner table. Lisa sat rigidly, the motel receipt flattened neatly in front of her like a piece of evidence. Mark entered late, loosening his tie, the weight of the day etched into his shoulders. "Where were you?" Lisa's voice was calm, but her eyes burned. "Work," he replied automatically, setting his keys in the dish by the door. Her hand slid the receipt across the table. "Work doesn't leave this kind of paper trail." Mark froze. The air thickened, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly loud. He swallowed, his jaw flexing. "It's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," Lisa snapped, her voice rising. Their children, seated nearby, exchanged nervous glances, forks suspended. "Don't lie to me in front of them." "Not anymore." Mark's silence was an answer sharper than words. He left the room without explanation, the slam of the door echoing like a gunshot. Across town, Rachel sat, in her own kitchen, the walls pressing in on her. She had felt Mark pulling away for weeks. Shorter visits, distracted eyes, phone calls cut short. Her journal lay open on the counter. In it, a line scrawled in desperate handwriting. "I've built my future around someone else's lies." Her phone lit up. No name, just the burner number. She snatched it, pressing it to her ear. "I can't keep this up," Mark's voice whispered harshly. "Things are unraveling." Rachel's reply was nearly a plea. "Then tell her." "Choose me." Static filled the line. Then, silence. But what the documentary would later reveal was that weeks before this night, a call had been logged to 911 from Rachel's address. The dispatcher picked up. A woman's voice began, frantic, and then hung up. No officer was dispatched. The report sat buried in records, untouched, until the night everything collapsed. The storm broke on a Thursday, the kind of night where the rain seemed to cling to the windows, where silence felt electric before the crash. Rachel's house smelled faintly of coffee and lavender candles, but the mood inside was anything but calm. Mark stood in the kitchen, dripping from the rain, his voice low and sharp. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," he hissed, fists braced against the counter. Rachel's eyes shone with desperation. "I've given you everything, Mark. I've lied to my father, to my colleagues, to myself. And for what? For you to keep me hidden like some mistake?" The neighbors would later say they heard raised voices, muffled through the thin walls. A shout. Something heavy crashing. Perhaps the ceramic mug that now lay shattered across the floor in pieces, coffee bleeding into the cracks. Mark pulled at his hair, pacing. "You don't get it. If this comes out, I lose my career, my kids, everything." Rachel stepped closer, her voice trembling. "And what do I lose? You think I can survive this alone? I need to know if I mean more than a secret." The clock on the wall ticked steadily, indifferent to their unraveling. Mark stormed out, the slam of the front door rattling the picture frames. Rachel sank into a chair, head in her hands, the shadows pressing in. Hours passed in suffocating silence. But sometime after midnight, the front door creaked again. Heavy footsteps crossed the floorboards. Rachel rose, startled, as Mark appeared, once more in the dim light, his face unreadable. A single sound cut through the night, a gunshot, distant yet close enough to shatter the fragile quiet. The camera lingers on Rachel's wide, terrified eyes, frozen in that instant. The street was alive again with flashing lights. Patrol cars lined the curb outside Rachel Cole's home, their beams cutting through the rain-soaked darkness. Yellow tape unfurled across the yard, the kind that told neighbors to step back but invited their stares all the same. Inside, Rachel sat on the couch, her hands trembling around a chipped mug of water an officer had pressed into them. Her face was pale, eyes swollen, mascara blurred into shadows beneath them. She spoke only when pressed. There was shouting, then a sound. Like a gun. Her voice cracked. And then he was gone. Detectives exchanged uneasy glances. The missing pronoun wasn't lost on them. He, Mark Harrison, one of their own. Forensics combed the scene methodically. A broken phone lay beneath the kitchen table, its screen spider-webbed. Blood speckled the linoleum near the shattered mug. Not enough for a fatal wound, but enough to suggest violence. Fingerprint powder dusted surfaces, black smudges blooming across cabinets and door frames. Outside, the commanding officer spoke to the press, words measured and hollow. "At this time, we can confirm there was a disturbance at this residence. We are investigating the disappearance of Detective Harrison." The reporter's questions cut sharper. "Are you treating the teacher as a suspect? Was there a weapon found?" The officer gave no answer, only a tired shake of his head. But tension bled into the precinct. Harrison wasn't just another case file. He was a brother in arms. Some whispered cover-up, others muttered betrayal. No one wanted to say the truth aloud. One of their own had walked into a lover's house, and now he was gone. At dawn, a report slid across a detective's desk. Freshly filed. A missing person, Detective Mark Harrison. By sunrise, the story was no longer confined to whispers on the street. News vans parked outside Rachel Cole's school, lenses aimed at the red brick entrance, where students filed past in clusters. The bold headline scrolled across the morning broadcast. Teacher and detective entangled in scandal. Affair exposed after disappearance. Rachel's classroom sat dark, her desk abandoned, her nameplate quietly removed by an administrator. Parents flooded the school office with calls, voices sharp with judgment. "How could you let this woman teach our kids?" The principal's polite apologies only fueled the outrage. By noon, Rachel's suspension was announced, the board citing pending investigation. Meanwhile, Lisa Harrison faced her own storm. She couldn't leave her house without whispers, chasing her. At the grocery store, glances lingered longer than greetings. At church, her pew sat empty while others pretended not to notice. To protect her dignity, Lisa filed a civil suit, claiming Rachel had willfully destroyed her family. The filing was leaked within hours, plastered across local talk shows like ammunition. Rachel's father, a retired officer, was asked for comment by reporters outside his modest bungalow. He shut the door firmly, but later that night, he sat. In front of the camera, his words curt, his voice like gravel. She disgraced herself. And worse, she disgraced the badge by dragging a cop into this mess. I can't defend her choices. The remark spread like fire, carving Rachel's isolation deeper. But then, investigators turned over a folder of Rachel's emails. In them, she had tracked Lisa Harrison's schedule, church events, volunteer meetings, even her children's soccer practices. The subject lines read like obsessions. The detectives looked at each other. This wasn't just a scandal anymore. It was starting to look like stalking. The investigation's tone changed overnight. What began as concern for a missing detective was now reframed in hushed tones. What if the teacher knew more than she admitted? Detectives summoned Rachel back to the precinct. She sat in the interview room, fluorescent light buzzing above, her hands clasped tightly. Across the table, Detective Alvarez laid out the evidence with deliberate calm. "You said Mark left your house that night," he began. "Yet you purchased industrial cleaning chemicals 2 days later. Can you explain that?" Rachel blinked, caught off guard. I clean my floors, that's all. My house is old." Alvarez slid another photo across the table. "A receipt for duct tape, purchased the same week." Rachel's voice cracked. It doesn't mean what you think. I'm not a killer." Her denials filled the room, but the evidence whispered louder. Meanwhile, detectives scoured the outskirts of town. A drone hovered over the riverbank, its camera sweeping the reeds. There, half submerged in mud, sat a black sedan. License plate: Harrison's. When the car was pulled out, rainwater and river silt gushed from its doors. Inside, forensics found a torn shirt soaked in blood. The fabric matched Mark's size. The stains matched his DNA. But there was something else. A faint trace of perfume. Floral, subtle, on the seatbelt. It was catalogued and bagged. Back at the station, rumors spread through hallways like wildfire. Some officers muttered betrayal. Others whispered cover-up. A few looked at Rachel's face on the news and wondered if they'd been duped by the quiet teacher all along. For the first time, the community asked openly, was Mark Harrison missing or murdered? The lab results came back in sterile envelopes, but the weight inside them was anything but sterile. Forensics confirmed it. The blood on the shirt in Mark's abandoned car was his. The traces matched with near certainty. Detectives gathered around the evidence board, their voices clipped. Alvarez pinned the shirt photo next to Rachel's portrait, drawing a line between them. "She swears she didn't harm him," Alvarez muttered. But everything is pointing her way. Yet a new file cracked the narrative open. Inside were legal documents signed weeks before the night of collapse. Mark Harrison had filed for divorce. Quietly. He hadn't told Rachel, nor Lisa. He wasn't leaving for love. He was leaving everyone. The revelation reframed Rachel's obsession, Lisa's suspicions, and Mark's sudden disappearance. Rachel, confronted again in the interview room, went pale when the papers were slid toward her. Her fingers hovered but didn't touch them. "He was divorcing her?" she whispered. "Then why didn't he tell me?" The betrayal sank in visibly, her voice rising. "You think I hurt him? No, I was the one who was lied to." But the investigators' doubts only deepened when divers recovered a body from the river. The cameras cut to the shoreline, officers standing grim as the black bag was hauled onto wet grass. Reporters clamored, headlines already forming. "Missing detective found dead." The coroner unzipped the bag under the dim light of the autopsy room. The frame was male, the clothing ragged, the body waterlogged. For a breathless moment, everyone assumed the truth had surfaced. Then came the shock. The dental records didn't match. It wasn't Mark. The detective's body was still missing. The interview room smelled faintly of bleach and burnt coffee, the air heavy with exhaustion. Rachel sat hunched forward, fingers knotted together, her voice raw from hours of questioning. Detectives Alvarez and Chen exchanged looks. This was the moment to push. "You need to help us understand," Alvarez said quietly. "What happened after the gunshot?" Rachel's eyes glistened, her voice trembling. "He was angry. I told him I'd tell Lisa everything if he didn't choose me. He grabbed the gun, he fired it, but not at me. It scared us both. He ran, out into the night. I never saw him again." Chen leaned in. "So you admit you lured him here, threatened him with exposure?" Her silence was answer enough. The detectives pressed further, but another voice shifted the ground beneath them. Lisa Harrison, sitting in her living room surrounded by unopened mail and framed family photos, agreed to an on-camera interview. At first, her tone was brittle, but eventually it cracked. "I knew," she confessed, voice breaking. "I knew about Rachel months ago. I didn't want to admit it. So I hired someone to follow him, a private investigator. I wanted proof." That private investigator was brought in, his statement calm but startling. "Mark found out I was tailing him. Instead of threatening me, he paid me off, told me to plant evidence, to make Rachel look guilty if anything happened. He said he needed a way out." The words hit like a gavel. Rachel wasn't framing Mark. Mark had been framing Rachel. Morning light poured across the precinct, pale and unforgiving. The board still bore Mark Harrison's face at its center, but now with more question marks than answers. His double life had collapsed, but the man himself remained missing. A ghost in the very city he once policed. Rachel was released. On bond, her career and reputation destroyed. Cameras followed her as she left the courthouse, silent, her eyes hollow. She wasn't guilty of murder, but she was guilty of love twisted into desperation. Lisa, seated in the same pew where she once renewed vows, whispered to a reporter, "I thought the betrayal was my burden. Now I see. It was his plan all along." Her humiliation had become a cruel kind of freedom. Detective Alvarez closed the case file on his desk but didn't lock it away. He stared at Mark's photo. "You don't just vanish," he murmured. "You're out there. And one day, we'll find you." The final montage unfolded. Rachel driving past the school she once taught at, windows rolled tight. Lisa burning, old photographs in her backyard. Alvarez watching the river, cigarette smoke curling upward. Then, grainy footage flickered onto the screen. A gas station security cam, dated 1 week after Mark disappeared. A tall man in a hooded jacket, limping, slightly, paying in cash. He turns, just enough for the frame to catch a familiar profile.